Alrighty, so this is a tutorial on CFrames. CFrames are short for coordinate frame, and it's basically a position that describes where something is and where it's looking, like its rotation. So I've set up a tutorial place here. It is in the description. So right here I have an arrow that follows this object. It's just an example object that I have. It will follow your character, but it will point towards the object. It's a nice thing you can do with CFrame. It is something I wanted a long time ago when I was first learning how to script, so I thought, here you go. I can go into more detail about how that works in just a minute, but I want to show everything off before I go into how it works. So here's two buttons. This button turns the object to the left, this one turns it to the right. So if I click this, it'll rotate 15 degrees to the left every time I click it. And this one will go 15 degrees to the right every time I click this. So every time you see one of these, it's just an example object. The red face is the front face. I can show you how to check that here. If I go to test objects, is where I have it. And this one's teleport spot 2, and you'll see in a minute why. If you go into the surfaces, the surface property, and go over to front surface and click on it, it'll highlight the front surface. This is really important. These buttons here, the blue ones, every time I click one of these buttons, I'll go to the next waypoint, I would say. So it'll face me in the direction that this is facing. If I were to mess with it, say rotate it this way, which is not a good idea if you're trying to make it teleport. Uh-oh, I messed it up. So if I were to go into the studio and rotate it up a little bit, you really shouldn't, but you know, if you're setting the CFrame or something, like your body, which is what this button is doing, it tries to sit you upright because it's a humanoid that's controlling your player, but it will force you into that rotation. Imagine this is like a camera view that's pointing up from here. This is where your position will be set, looking in this direction. And this one goes down to the one down there. You know, so you can teleport. This over here is like the most useless thing ever in my opinion, but I just made it for an example so you guys have stuff to use or have stuff to play around with. This is a weird duplicating platform thing that you can just walk on and it would create more platforms. It doesn't have support for other directions because it's supposed to be an example. In the script, it'll show you how it works. I'll go over how the scripts work after I show you the examples. Down there's the death barrier I made. It doesn't really kill you, but it respawns you. It's pretty useful, depending on what kind of game you're making. So this last button over here is something a lot of people would like to know how to do, if you don't already. It moves your camera and puts it somewhere, wherever I have the things. It's up there. There it is. Right there. And then there's another one right there. You can see. It'll transition to that one and then it'll go to the other one. So if I click it, it goes to this one, and after 3 seconds it'll move to this one, and then after 3 it'll go back. If I were to try to move my camera or anything, I can still move my character because I didn't set my walk speed to 0, but here's the scripty part. You know, the only part that matters. Alright. This is the platform that you saw, the duplicating platform. I'll do this one first because it's probably... Nah, I'll go to the other one. This one's the most simple. This one, it's pretty much just rotating a cube, but it's not using orientation because I don't know if Roblox has changed this yet, but if you rotate something with orientation, it will go on top of whatever it's touching. Not always something you would want to happen. So I have a buttons folder over here for all the buttons, so you can have a nice organized little example place. But here's the left button, here's the right button, and here's the scripts. Double click on it to open it if you didn't know that for some reason. And you should know what events are, but if you don't, I can go over that right now. If you right click on something in the Object Explorer and click Help, you'll get the wiki page on it. And an event is something that it fires whenever you do something that would trigger that event. So you click it, it'll trigger the mouse click event. If you right click it, if you hover over it and then you stop hovering over it, if you put your mouse on it. But that's just, this instance is specific events. So this will handle the mouse click event with the function. I know I'm going over stuff some of you may know already, but it's useful to know, just in case you didn't. So a CFrame is, like I said earlier, it's basically a position and a rotation, but in its own object, its own property. If I go to the object itself, you won't see the CFrame in the property menu because it's hidden. And it's more of a, it's just complicated. When I read this, CFrame is a property of the cube. So if I do cube.cframe, it's telling me, well, that's the CFrame. That's where it is. And if I want to change where the cube CFrame is, or I just want to alter it just a little bit, I can set its CFrame right there. And if I set its CFrame to where it is already, then it won't move. Nothing will happen. But this part right here is something special that only happens when you're trying to rotate a CFrame. If you use CFrame.angles, obviously you're trying to change the angles, but how it works is there's an X, Y, and Z axis to rotate on, similar to when you click on it. Here you go. This is the Y axis. You know, if you go in the View tab, and over here you can display axes. They're color-coded. It'll show up in the bottom left of your studio. Y-axis is green, X-axis is red, Z-axis is blue. So the X-axis, right here, the red one, it's basically modifying it, like you're using it in Studio. If you see from the angles, the Y-axis usually will rotate, you know, like you're spinning it. But depends on its orientation. So you just made a new part, you haven't really rotated or anything. The Y-axis will default to that because the front side is parallel to the ground or perpendicular. I guess it's both, but you know, their view is parallel. So they're like this, or whatever the object is facing this way. So if I were to use this, you multiply CFrame to angles with the CFrame, which just means you're trying to... Sorry for that squeak, it happens a lot. This is the X-axis, the Y-axis, and the Z-axis. And why would I put math.red? Well, you can't just put a number in, because the way CFrame angles works is it doesn't work in degrees, it works in radians. So you have to do math.red, and it will take this number and use it like a degree. So that's 15 degrees. I don't think you could put a negative inside, so I put the negative on the outside just to be safe. Because in the past I have had issues with that. So I would always put the negative on the outside. I put the negative on this one, the red one, which is the one I'm editing right now, is because you're rotating it negative, which is this way, rotating to the left. Sorry for the wordiness. If I were to put like math.red 5, then it'll also rotate 5 degrees on the x-axis, which would look kind of nasty, but let's just try it out. There you go. how you can do that. For what I'm trying to do here, this isn't helping, but you might need it someday. That's annoying, isn't it? This still works the same way. I haven't modified it yet. This one, though, interesting. I have all of this in the description as a download file. You can download the place file and mess with it. And I have put comments in some of the scripts, like, where's it? This one. I've basically explained it. Double dash is a comment. Everything after the double dash on that line will not be rendered as code. Sorry about my brother in the background. I don't have another area to do this. You should know how a basic touch function works, but if you don't, there's a wiki, and there's probably some other tutorial that it's not really a complicated thing. Functions, I might do a tutorial on functions and event, but it's very simple. So everything in this function, this is the function and everything in it. It will check if whatever touched it was a player, and if it can duplicate, because it only wants one platform to duplicate one time. It'll make a new platform with this, it'll set a variable, and it'll be like, hey, this is the new platform. And it'll set the CFrame of that, so I can tell it, this is where I want it to go. I don't want to rotate it, I just want to set its CFrame to this CFrame, but move to the side a little bit. Vector 3's work the same way, X, Y, Z. So, the X direction, I can go over this platform, and I can look in the bottom left, where the X is. It's probably kind of blurry in video, but it's relative to your camera, so if I look this way, you can see that the X direction is forward. So I want to add this to the X direction. The 7 is because it's 7 studs big, so I want to add it 1 full part length that way. And you gotta set its parent to whatever parent you want, as long as it's, you know, in the workspace somewhere. If I open this button script, I have an event linked to this click detector. When you click it, it also tells you what clicked it, like who clicked it. It will tell you a player, and it will be like, alright, let's get the position, or the CFrame, of where their root part is. This is their CFrame, and I just want to change that, so I put an equals. I know I'm still being really basic, but I want to change the CFrame to the CFrame of this test object I have here, which is teleport spot 1, I think. Let me see. Yeah, it's teleport spot 1. If I go on to the test objects, teleport spot 1, it is facing this way because I modified it. I probably shouldn't have. Should always have it parallel to the ground, because it might cause you problems if you're using it for a teleport. I have this here, show the front face. You don't have to have this visible, you don't have to have it all big. It just has to, I mean, you could create a CFrame without having an object, but it's a lot easier with an object. Just make it invisible, and no one will ever know it's there. Make sure you have can collide off. You can lock it if you want, but this is a test place, so I didn't. Now, when I go to this object with the CFrame, all I'm doing is setting the humanoid root part, which is your base body part, to this teleport spot I have here, which is on top of the tower. And then you can use this button. It does the same thing, but it teleports you here instead. I hope this makes a bit of sense so far, and if it doesn't make any sense or you have questions, comments please. This arrow, a lot of people would probably like this, but it's basically a simple union that has the front side where the front side should be, and if you have some kind of problem with this, maybe you want to make this with your own arrow or something, please make sure that the front face is on the front. And the best way to do that would be to, in your union, make sure the bigger part has the front face in the front when you union it, and then you shouldn't have any problems unless you have some CSG problem like this, and it can be annoying, but there are ways to get around it. Alright, I had to reopen that thingy because somehow my arrow, it disappeared. This is controlled from the client. You know, the better way to do it. you should have FE on when you make a game, unless you don't know how to use FE for some reason. I don't blame you. It's something that needs to be taught. I might do a tutorial on that in the future. You can have FE off, but it will be exposed to more exploits. I have a local script inside of this screen GUI and the player GUI because I don't want it to reset when you spawn, especially with this. When you use this run service event, it will not stop until you disconnect it. So I recommend being careful with this. You can use a while true do, but it's not as quick, and hopefully you'll understand it by my comments. I'm not sure if you can see it too well. That's where I have the example place, so you can see what I'm doing. And you can mess with it. Alright, so it's got another mouse click thingy. You can click the button, but this time it's connected from a local script because I want the player who clicked it to have their camera modified and not everyone's. Because if you try to modify the current camera on the server, I don't know what will happen. I don't think it'll do anything. So you should only modify the current camera from the client. I set the camera type because you can't move the camera if it's not set to scriptable. Right here. And here's the CFrames again. Good old CFrames. I have the camera CFrame because the camera has a CFrame. That's how cameras work. I set the CFrame to the camera spot. The first camera spot is up there. I don't know if it's very visible from here. Oh, there it is. It's another one of these test objects. It starts here and then looks down. Because the front face, right here, that's where it's facing. So if I go in front of it, this is basically what it is looking at. If you set the camera CFrame to this, but that's the camera thing. I'm going over the arrow. You can look more into this with the example place. So a render stepped function is basically something that will update every frame instead of a while true do. So I get the player out of the local player because we need to do game.players.local player. Game.players.local player is you, the one that's running the client. When I do player.character, that is the character. There's not too much to say about it, but you know, there's the humanoid root part again. If you move this with the CFrame or anything else, like a position or an orientation, you're moving your whole character, because all your body parts are connected to it. But if I were actually scripting in a game, I would try to be as compact as possible, and I'd probably shove everything I can into the same line. But this is a good habit, just in case you want to use this again for some reason. Here's a quick tip, if you don't know already. If you do a local inside of an if statement, everything after or before the if statement will not know that this exists because it's only for this if statement. Unless you have another if statement or something inside of it. Like right there, but I don't have any situations like that. Unless you're talking about the player. You say a set player before all this, and everything after will know what it is. This is creating a CFrame, calling it arrow pose. I called it arrow pose because it's like the position of the arrow, I guess, but it's not really position of the CFrame. I do CFrame.new, so I can create a CFrame from a position looking somewhere else, and that's what this is for. If you do CFrame.new, do a position, comma, another position, it'll go from that position, pointed to the other position. So if I get the humanoid root parts position and add 6 studs up, it'll put that from you and 6 studs up. That's where the arrow will be. And when I put test objects that point to that position, that's where it's looking. I think I over-explained it enough. All I'm doing is creating a CFrame, naming it arrow pose, and setting the arrow's position to that CFrame. You can control whether this is actually happening, or maybe the arrow is invisible, maybe the arrow is doing some kind of animation. There's a lot of things you can change about this. That's just a basic way of creating an arrow that points at something. It doesn't have to follow your player, it could follow some objects, it could stay in place and point at you. If you want to offset the arrow's CFrame, maybe turn it a little bit, maybe you want to spin it, I have something for you. Here's a little bonus thing. I'm going to write a little spinny thing, I guess. If I want to make the arrow spin, then I have to rotate it on the z-axis because I want to rotate it like this, and that's the z because it's blue. I made a current rotation variable because this is a thingy render step function. It's constantly setting the CFrame, and if I want to rotate it and animate it while it's setting the CFrame, I would need like a variable because I want to add to the variable. Maybe every frame I'll add 1. Set current rotation to current rotation plus 1. So now I have something that is constantly adding 1 every frame. So current rotation will always be adding. I can use CFrame.angles and rotate the z by doing math.rad on the z and doing current rotation. And if it's too intense, I can add less than 1 to the current rotation. But let's see how this looks. Hey, look. Exactly what I wanted. It's still setting the CFrame, but it's just rotating it on the z-axis. Maybe I want it to go a little bit faster, because this is kind of slow in my opinion. So I will go into the scripts. Instead of adding 1 degree every frame, I'll add 4. 4 times as fast. There we go. That's still, that's a little bit too fast for me, but it's a good example. So if I'm right above it, look at me. Well, that's all I got. Questions in the comments. You can download the thingy in the description. Bye.